They fought Rome. Let that settle for a moment. At a time when the Roman Empire was the undisputed military superpower of the known world, when no army from Britain to Persia had been able to permanently defy its legions, a queen from the Sudanese desert led her people against Roman-occupied Egypt, seized Egyptian towns, and negotiated a treaty that Rome ultimately honored for decades. Her name was Amanirenas. She had one eye. She was magnificent.
After losing Egypt to Assyria in the 660s BCE, the Kushite kingdom turned inward, and what it found when it looked inward was a capital waiting to be born. In 591 BCE, the Egyptian pharaoh Psamtik II launched a massive invasion of Kush. Egyptian troops, Greek mercenaries, Carian soldiers, and drove deep into Nubian territory, capturing the Kushite capital of Napata itself. It was a devastating blow. The city survived and would remain a sacred site, but it was no longer safe as the seat of power. The Kushite court moved south, significantly south, between the 5th and 6th cataracts of the Nile, in a region of reliable rainfall and remarkably fertile land, the new capital of Meroe arose. Meroe was, in many ways, everything Napata could not be. It sat at the intersection of great trade routes, connecting sub-Saharan Africa to the Red Sea to Egypt and the Mediterranean, the African interior to the wider world. Merchants from India passed through here. Goods from the African rainforest reached these markets. Gold, ivory, ebony, exotic animals, incense, all of it flowed through Meroe in quantities that made the city fabulously wealthy. And iron. The Kushites at Meroe developed one of the ancient world's most sophisticated iron-smelting industries. The slag heaps from their furnaces, still visible today, are vast. Some historians have called Meroe the Birmingham of the ancient world. The iron they produced fueled their own military and flooded African trade networks. It was transformative technology, spreading from Meroe into the interior of Africa, changing agriculture and warfare and daily life for populations across the continent. At Meroe, the Kushite civilization also began to shed the last of its Egyptian skin. The Meroitic script, developed here in the final centuries BCE, replaced Egyptian hieroglyphs as the writing system of the Kushite state. It was originally adapted from the Egyptian alphabet, but used for the Nubian language, creating, for the first time, a writing system specifically designed for the language the Nubians actually spoke. It fills the walls of temples and tombs throughout Sudan. We can read the letters, we still cannot fully translate the language. It remains one of history's great unsolved linguistic mysteries. The Meroitic script is, in a way, a perfect metaphor for what Kush had become, recognizable to outsiders, fundamentally, irreducibly itself.
One of the most distinctive features of Meroitic Nubian civilization, one that consistently bewildered and fascinated outsiders, was the role of women in governance. Succession in Kush ran through the female line. The Queen Mother was a figure of immense formal authority, and periodically, repeatedly, women ruled Kush outright. Their title was Kandake, which Greek and Latin writers Latinized to Candace, and which became in ancient sources almost synonymous with Kushite female power. These were not figureheads. They were commanders-in-chief, administrators, builders, and, when necessary, generals. Which brings us to Rome. In 30 BCE, Rome absorbed Egypt. Overnight, the Kushites went from having Egypt as their neighbor to having the Roman Empire as their neighbor. The change was significant. Rome was aggressive, expanding, and had a habit of demanding tribute from client states on its borders. For a few years, the Kushites paid. Then they stopped. Around 25 BCE, a Kushite army led by Kandake Amanirenas, the ruling queen, who had lost an eye in battle and apparently didn't consider this a reason to stay home, invaded Roman-held Egypt. Her forces swept through border towns, took prisoners and captured something extraordinary, a large bronze portrait head of the Emperor Augustus Caesar. They brought it back to Meroe, and they buried it under the threshold of a temple, under the steps, so that for as long as the temple stood, every person who entered would walk over the face of the Roman emperor. It was a message. It was also, by any measure, a power move of staggering audacity. Rome responded with the only language it knew. General Gaius Petronius marched south with a substantial Roman force, burned Napata, and pressed on toward Meroe, but could not take it. Kushite defenses held. The Romans settled into a fortified position in the desert, and a stalemate developed. In 22 BCE, Amanirenas sent envoys to the island of Samos to negotiate directly with Augustus. The final treaty was remarkably favorable to Kush. The Romans withdrew, returned the Nubian territories they had captured, and reduced the tribute. Effectively, Amanirenas got better terms than she'd had before the war began. She had fought Rome, and Rome had blinked. Augustus's head stayed in Meroe. It stayed under those temple steps for nearly 2,000 years, until a British archaeological team dug it up in 1910 and carried it back to London, where it sits today. We can only imagine what Amanirenas would have thought about that.
The centuries after Amanirenas were not catastrophic, not immediately, but they were gradually relentless. Rome grew and grew, and as it grew, it increasingly monopolized Mediterranean trade, squeezing Meroe out of the commercial networks that had sustained its wealth for generations. From the southeast, a new power was rising, the Kingdom of Axum, located in what is today Ethiopia and Eritrea, ambitious and expanding, pushing into Kushite territory along the Red Sea coast and cutting Meroe off from the lucrative eastern trade. The Kushite state contracted, slowly at first, then faster. The pyramids kept being built. The last Nubian pyramids date to the 4th century CE. The temples kept functioning, the kings kept ruling, but the resources were thinning, the territory shrinking, the external pressure mounting on all sides. Around 350 CE, the Aksumite king Izana launched a full-scale invasion of Kush. His inscriptions, discovered in modern Ethiopia, describe the campaign matter-of-factly: marching, fighting, defeating, claiming. The city of Meroe fell. After more than 1,000 years, the kingdom of Kush was gone. They were never gone. They consolidated into smaller successor kingdoms: Nobatia in the north, Makuria in the center, Alodia in the south. These smaller states were poorer, yes, less powerful, yes, but they were alive, they were organized, they remembered who they were. And they were about to choose a new broad. By the 6th century CE, Christianity had swept through the Nubian kingdoms. The conversion was thorough and, by the standards of the ancient world, relatively peaceful. Byzantine missionaries came south. Kushite temples were converted into churches. The old gods were replaced by the new god. And the Nubians, who had always been remarkable adopters of outside religious traditions, who had taken Egyptian Amun and made him their own, who had built on Kushite religious foundations for millennia, did exactly what they had always done. They made Christianity theirs. The evidence left behind is extraordinary. Nubian Christian art, the murals that survive in excavated churches, most famously at Faras in modern Sudan, is unlike any Christian art anywhere else in the world. The angels have dark skin. The kings are depicted with the dignity of pharaohs. The biblical scenes are set in an unmistakably Nubian landscape. This was not Egyptian Christianity, or Greek Christianity, or Roman Christianity. This was Nubian Christianity, and it was vivid and confident and deeply felt.
For 6 centuries, the Christian kingdoms of Nubia endured. They maintained their independence, traded with both the Islamic world and the Christian world, and, in one of history's most remarkable diplomatic achievements, negotiated and sustained the Bakht, a peace treaty with the Arab rulers of Egypt that lasted for an extraordinary 600 years. The Bakht was extraordinary precisely because it treated Nubia as an equal, not a subject, not a client, an equal. The Nubians provided goods, the Egyptians provided goods. Both sides honored safe passage. For 600 years, this fragile, remarkable agreement held, proof that the Nubian kingdoms had enough strength and enough sophistication to make peaceful coexistence worthwhile to their more powerful northern neighbors. But time, as it always does, ran out. In 1250, the Mamluk Sultanate seized power in Cairo. The Mamluks were not interested in old treaties. They demanded the Bakht's slave tribute be reinstated, and not just resumed, but paid retroactively for all the years it had lapsed. It was an impossible demand, and both sides knew it. War followed. Nubia fought. It fought with real ferocity. In 1272, King David struck back, destroying a key port on the Red Sea pilgrimage route and raiding as far north as Aswan. But the Mamluks were formidable, and they brought resources that Makuria could not match. In 1276, a Mamluk army marched on Dongola, Makuria's capital, and crushed the resistance. King David was captured and executed. What followed was slow, grinding, and devastating. The royal family fractured into factions competing for Mamluk favor. In 1317, a Muslim ruler was installed on the Makurian throne. The great throne hall of Dongola was converted into a mosque. The bubonic plague arrived from the north, decimating communities along the Nile. Bedouin tribes crossed the Red Sea, raiding and settling in territories the Nubian states could no longer protect. In 1365, a brutal civil war destroyed and abandoned Dongola itself. Nubian society, which had endured for nearly 15,000 years, entered a period of total collapse. The kingdoms dissolved, the churches went dark, Nubian literature and art vanished from the historical record, the bishops stopped coming, the priests grew old and died and were not replaced. By the time the Ottoman Empire expanded into Nubia in the 1560s, they found no organized Christian society, no government, no church, no pyramids being built. The world that had begun on the banks of the Nile, in the land south of Egypt, in the places where the gold came from, that world was gone. But the people were not gone. They were never gone. The Nubians of today, predominantly Muslim now, scattered by decades of displacement, including the flooding of their ancestral homelands by the Aswan Dam in the 1960s, still speak their traditional languages, still practice their traditional music, still remember, in ways that cannot be legislated or flooded or conquered out of existence, who their ancestors were. They were the children of a river that gave the world gold. They were the builders of pyramids that still stand. They were the people who defeated Rome and outlasted Assyria and sheltered Christianity for 6 centuries in the desert while the faith took root across the world. They were the kingdom of Kush. They were Nubia. The river is still there, and it remembers.